I know how deeply you, entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered.
King Charles had expected obedience, not negotiation. The request sounded simple. William was to attend a private estate meeting at Windsor, without lawyers, advisors, or written conditions. But the prince refused, calmly, deliberately. And when that answer reached the king's desk, Charles did not merely express disappointment. He erupted, striking the table and demanding to know when a conversation between father and son had become a legal confrontation capable of dividing the future of the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles stared at the letter as though challenged. A private secretary carried it into the study and placed it beside a red estate folder for sensitive property decisions. The king removed his glasses, read the opening paragraph again, and asked whether William had truly written "formal representation required." The secretary confirmed it. Charles fell silent, but the silence felt heavier than anger. The meeting concerned far more than houses. Windsor Castle, the royal residence and working fortress used by the sovereign, stood at the center of a dispute over who could occupy private homes, fund upkeep, and preserve promises into the next reign. Charles wanted the matter kept inside the family. William knew any agreement could limit his authority and burden him with obligations he never approved. The refusal made that fear unmistakable. William had instructed his legal team to reject any estate arrangement without a written record and review. He had anticipated pressure. He had prepared for it. That realization wounded Charles more deeply than the answer, because his son had entered the conflict expecting danger from his father. The king stood so quickly that his chair struck the cabinet. He accused the prince of turning a family discussion into a courtroom and treating his father like an adversary. Camilla remained near the fireplace, watching. The queen consort knew what waited inside the red folder: an unsigned memorandum, a draft agreement that would change how 3 royal residences were allocated after Charles's reign. William had never seen the document. Someone close to him, however, had warned that a private conversation could later be presented as consent. Charles lifted the memorandum, stared at his son's refusal beneath it, and slammed both papers onto the desk. Camilla did not interrupt. She saw frustration harden into command. Charles ordered a second invitation prepared immediately. This one would not sound like a father asking his son to attend. It would come from the sovereign and demand obedience. Yet before that command could reach William, the private dispute began exposing what each man feared he was about to lose. To the outside world, they were king and heir, 2 men joined by duty and succession. Behind the palace doors, they were also father and son, carrying years of unspoken frustration into a dispute neither could afford to lose. Charles believed the estates represented continuity, memory, and his final authority over the family. William saw something more dangerous: promises made without scrutiny, obligations buried in tradition, and a future reign that could begin under the weight of decisions he never approved. Charles felt the rejection more deeply than he admitted. The royal estates were not merely grand homes. They were properties tied to the crown, family trusts, private ownership, and generations of responsibility. To the king, each residence carried a piece of his life memories of his mother, years spent waiting, and the painful patience required before the monarchy finally became his to lead. William's demand for lawyers therefore struck at something personal. It suggested that all those years had not earned trust. Camilla heard that pain when the two were alone. Charles told her that his son's caution felt like an accusation, as though his word carried less value than a legal signature. The queen consort urged him not to abandon the meeting, but her concern was not entirely detached. One clause in the draft memorandum, a written proposal setting out future estate arrangements, protected continued access to a country residence for members of her family. She understood that William's refusal threatened more than royal pride. William carried a different fear. At Adelaide Cottage, his family home near Windsor, the prince reread the invitation, while Catherine watched his expression tighten. He knew a private agreement could follow him into his own reign, bringing maintenance costs, disputed access, and promises made to relatives he had never personally approved. The future king could already hear the argument that might be used against him years later. "You agreed in the room," Catherine asked to see the letter. The princess studied one paragraph twice, then quietly pointed to wording she remembered from an earlier dispute over royal housing. The language was too polished, too carefully protected, to have been written in haste. She suspected the estate proposal had been prepared long before Charles sent the invitation, meaning the meeting might not have been a discussion at all. It might have been the final step in securing William's consent. The prince folded the paper carefully and returned it to the envelope. "I will meet my father," he said, "but I will not walk into that room without protection." Catherine reached across the table and agreed. Then Princess Anne called. The Princess Royal revealed that the conflict had not begun with the letter. It had started months earlier at a family gathering, with a private promise, a hidden document, and a witness Charles never expected. That forgotten promise would soon become the fault line beneath Windsor, and the reason William no longer trusted conversations held without a record. The refusal at Windsor was not born in a lawyer's office. It began during a winter dinner at Sandringham, when a private conversation crossed a line William could not forget. There had been no shouting that night, no public humiliation, only a promise made after midnight, a document mentioned too casually, and Charles's sudden insistence that his son should trust him without asking for details. Months later, everyone would look back on that evening, as the moment caution became suspicion, and suspicion became resistance. Charles had spoken quietly after the Christmas gathering began to empty. He told William that Camilla would receive lifetime use of Wood Farm, a private residence on the Sandringham estate, along with permanent guest rights at another family property. The king presented it as protection, not power. He wanted the prince to support the arrangement when the wider estate plan was finalized, arguing that the queen consort should never feel uncertain about her place after his reign ended. William did not reject the idea. He asked whether the promise appeared in a trust, an estate memorandum, or any succession document. A trust is a legal arrangement controlling how property is managed, while a memorandum records terms that may guide future decisions. Charles answered that nothing formal had been completed. The prince accepted that assurance, but the question stayed with him. The following morning changed everything. William noticed a senior courtier carrying an estate briefing through the corridor. The folder shifted, exposing a cover page marked with the words "Approved in Principle" and dated 3 weeks earlier. The phrase meant the proposal had already received preliminary agreement, even if final signatures had not been added. The future king felt the warmth drain from the conversation he remembered. His father had not invented the plan after dinner. It had existed before William was asked for support. Charles faced him in the library soon afterward. The prince held the briefing page and asked why he had been told there was no formal arrangement. The king replied that preliminary approval was not the same as completion. He accused his son of hiding behind technical language when the real issue was family loyalty. Princess Anne entered before the exchange ended. She heard Charles insist that some royal decisions required trust rather than documentation. The Princess Royal, the sovereign's sister traditionally known for public duty, watched William's expression harden. Later, Anne warned him never to accept an estate commitment that could not be independently reviewed. William stood beside the door and returned the page only after a long silence. "Next time," he told Charles, "I will bring someone whose job is to remember every word." The warning proved prophetic. What began as one residence expanded into several properties, household budgets, guest privileges, and guarantees extending beyond Charles's reign. Now the king understood that William's lawyers were not a sudden act of rebellion. They were the consequence of Sandringham. When father and son finally entered the same room again, the argument was no longer about whether they trusted each other, it was about which of them had the power to proceed without trust. Charles entered the Windsor drawing room expecting his son to come alone. William arrived with 2 lawyers waiting outside the door. That single detail transformed the meeting before either man sat down. The king saw a challenge to his authority. The prince saw a boundary finally enforced. Within 7 minutes, chairs were moved, accusations were spoken, and a sealed estate document remained unopened between them, because neither father nor son would surrender the principle that had brought them there. Charles stopped before reaching his chair. He asked why legal representatives had been brought into a private family matter when his instruction had been clear. William answered that the lawyers would remain in the adjoining room, but they would not leave Windsor. The prince had attended the meeting. He had not agreed to surrender the protection he considered necessary. The king allowed the conversation to continue, though anger had already entered it. He placed the draft estate memorandum on the table between them. A memorandum was a written record setting out proposed terms before a final agreement, and this one covered lifetime residence rights, private guest access, maintenance costs, and limits on how future occupants could alter several properties. None of those provisions would end with a simple handshake. Charles told his son that bringing lawyers sent a message no sovereign could ignore. It suggested that the heir believed the king's word was unsafe. He asked whether William had forgotten the difference between succession and opposition, between preparing to inherit the crown and challenging the man who still wore it. William did not raise his voice. That restraint made his answer harder. He said loyalty did not require him to accept obligations he had never reviewed. Protecting the next reign, he insisted, was not an attack on the present one. It was the duty of the person expected to live with every promise after Charles was gone. Then the truth surfaced. Charles admitted that estate managers and private trustees had already discussed the document. Trustees are individuals responsible for managing property or funds for others, and their involvement meant the proposal was far more advanced than William had been told. His attendance had not been requested to begin negotiations. It had been expected to provide family approval before his advisors could challenge the consequences. The prince looked at the sealed folder and understood the pressure. A private nod could later be described as consent. Charles pushed the document across the table. William refused to touch it. The king ordered him to open the folder. The future king slowly moved it back and said, "Not without counsel." Charles rose, his face burning with fury. He declared the meeting over. William reached the door before his father delivered the final warning. If the heir would not cooperate, the sovereign might settle the estates without consulting him at all. But the threat concealed a dangerous truth. Charles possessed the authority to act. Yet William controlled something the palace could not easily replace. The confrontation appeared unequal. One man was sovereign, the other was expected to obey. Yet royal power is rarely as simple as the crown resting on one head. Charles could approve arrangements, instruct courtiers, and summon trustees. William could refuse cooperation, challenge financial commitments, and make clear that no private promise would survive unchanged into his reign. The king held the pen, the prince held the future, and everyone surrounding them understood that neither form of power could completely defeat the other. Charles still controlled the machinery around the estates. As sovereign, he could influence who occupied certain royal residences, direct private secretaries, and approve decisions involving property under his personal authority. Yet William possessed leverage of his own. The Duchy of Cornwall, an estate providing income and resources to the heir, gave the prince financial independence. More importantly, he could refuse to preserve arrangements after accession. Charles could create promises today, but William could decide whether those promises survived tomorrow. The balance shifted when the king learned that his son's lawyers had requested every estate schedule, maintenance estimate, and private letter connected to the memorandum. Charles read the list twice. To him, it did not look like caution. It looked like preparation for a case. He began to believe William was no longer protecting himself from one document, but building a permanent barrier against his father's authority. Princess Anne refused to soften the truth. She met her brother privately and told him that demanding an unrecorded agreement had created the suspicion he now condemned. Charles accused her of encouraging the prince's disobedience. The Princess Royal answered that loyalty could not be measured by how quickly someone surrendered the right to ask questions. Her words did not calm him. They exposed how isolated he had become. Then a senior trustee refused immediate approval. A trustee is a person legally responsible for managing assets on behalf of others, and his refusal carried serious weight. He warned that any arrangement made without William's objections being formally recorded could collapse the moment the crown passed to a new sovereign. Camilla understood the danger before Charles admitted it. The queen consort sat alone with the memorandum after he left, reading the same clause again and again. Subject to future sovereign approval. She circled the words and pressed the pen into the page. Without William's acknowledgement, her residence protections might last only as long as her husband's reign. Her security now depended on repairing a relationship she had never controlled. Charles responded by tightening his grip. He ordered estate staff to suspend every informal discussion with William's household, believing silence would force cooperation. Instead, the conflict escaped the room. The king's decision ensured that servants, relatives, and advisors would all feel the shockwave. By the following morning, the argument had moved beyond Charles and William. Estate briefings were frozen. Household calls went unanswered. Staff members who had served both men were quietly asked where their loyalty rested. The monarchy did not announce a crisis, yet its daily machinery began reflecting one. Doors that had once remained open were closed. Messages became formal. Even family invitations were reconsidered. And at the center of the silence stood Catherine, watching her husband absorb the cost of refusing his father. Charles suspended every joint estate consultation between his household and William's team. Discussions about repairs, staffing, and future residence use vanished from the schedule. What had once been routine now required written permission. The king believed distance would restore order. Instead, it made the fracture impossible to ignore. Edward urged restraint, warning that a family dispute could become a lasting division if pride replaced judgment. Anne supported documented negotiations, insisting that clear records protected everyone. Camilla pressed Charles in the opposite direction. The queen consort feared that William's refusal might become a precedent, teaching others that royal decisions could be resisted through delay. Catherine felt the cost most clearly before dawn. She found William standing alone in his study, reading a message confirming that a planned family gathering at Windsor had been cancelled. The prince did not look angry. He looked tired. He admitted that legal oversight remained necessary, but he had never intended to humiliate his father or turn two royal households into opposing camps. Then the missing page deepened the danger. William's lawyers received most of the estate memorandum, but one appendix had been removed. An appendix is an added section containing supporting details, and this one was titled, Continuing Private Beneficiaries. Its absence suggested that the most sensitive promises, those protecting individuals beyond Charles's reign, were still being withheld. The king responded by considering a harsher path. He instructed his private secretary to examine whether the arrangement could be signed as a personal sovereign directive, an order issued through the monarch's own authority, without William's consent. The decision would allow Charles to act now, but it could also invite immediate reversal later. Anne heard of the plan and confronted her brother. She set down her teacup with a sharp click and told him that forcing the document through might win the estate dispute while destroying the confidence of the man who would one day defend his legacy. Charles began to answer, then stopped. For the first time, the warning reached him not as political advice, but as something painfully personal. What would remain of his victory if William inherited the crown determined to undo it? For the first time since his eruption, the king stopped asking how to defeat William and began wondering whether he was about to lose his son. The turning point did not arrive in a council chamber. It came after dark in a small sitting room at Windsor, where Charles asked William to meet him without aides, lawyers, secretaries, or even the disputed estate file. The prince hesitated, then agreed on one condition: no decisions would be made that night. For the first time since the conflict began, father and son entered a room with nothing to sign and no one to impress. What followed was not surrender, it was confession. Charles made the purpose clear before either man sat down. This was not the estate meeting he had previously demanded, and nothing said would count as approval, consent, or a binding promise. William accepted those terms. No officials waited outside. No written minutes would preserve the conversation. Only two chairs, untouched tea, and years of buried tension stood between them. The king spoke first, but the authority had gone from his voice. He admitted that the memorandum had not been driven only by property or control. Fear had shaped it. Charles worried about what would happen to Camilla after his death, and whether other relatives who depended on his protection would feel abandoned when a new reign began. The monarch had tried to secure their future before he was no longer there to defend it. William listened without interrupting. Then the prince explained that he had never refused the meeting to punish his father. He rejected the belief that love required blind consent. Any promise made in private could survive the men who made it, burdening a future sovereign with costs, obligations, and restrictions that had never been openly examined. Charles lowered his eyes. He acknowledged that several protections connected to Camilla had been expanded after the Sandringham conversation. The queen consort's guarantees had grown from one residence into wider access, continuing support, and conditions affecting more than one property. William had not been informed. The king finally admitted that asking for trust while withholding those changes had been wrong. The future king did not demand humiliation in return. He offered a path forward. Reasonable lifetime protection could remain, but every term would be written clearly, reviewed by both sides, and limited so it could not permanently control the next reign. Charles lifted his tea, but his hand stopped before the cup reached his lips. He asked whether William had truly believed his own father intended to trap him. The prince paused. "I believed you were afraid," he answered, "and frightened people sometimes ask others to promise too much." The words landed without anger, yet they carried more force than any accusation. Charles agreed to withdraw the original memorandum. But peace inside that room created a new challenge outside it. Camilla, the household, and a public already sensing division would need an explanation. The private battle had ended with an understanding, yet the monarchy still had to face the consequences of a conflict the palace could no longer fully conceal. The palace had released no details, but silence created its own story. By sunrise, Britain awoke to headlines describing an unprecedented clash between the king and the heir over royal property, legal authority, and family trust. Commentators debated whether William had protected the crown or insulted it. Crowds gathered outside Windsor. Cameras waited at palace gates. Then one newspaper printed an image that transformed an internal dispute into a national symbol: Charles arriving alone, while William's car remained outside. The story escaped through small details the palace had failed to contain. Estate meetings disappeared from official schedules. Household consultations were cancelled without explanation. Most damaging of all, two legal representatives had been seen arriving at Windsor on the day father and son were meant to speak privately. Together, those clues told the press that this was not routine planning. Something inside the family had broken. Britain divided quickly. Supporters of Charles argued that the sovereign should be allowed to settle family arrangements without turning every conversation into a legal contest. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, the person who currently holds the crown and its authority. Others praised William for refusing any commitment that might restrict the next reign before its consequences had been examined. The debate was no longer about houses. It was about whether loyalty required silence. Charles felt the exposure like a public stripping of dignity. He read coverage describing his request as an attempt to pressure the heir into secret consent. The king knew fear had shaped the memorandum, but seeing that fear recast as manipulation wounded him. A private effort to protect Camilla had become a national argument about abuse of power. William felt no triumph. Broadcasters called him the prince who had stood up to the monarch, language that made the conflict sound like victory over an enemy. He told Catherine that he did not want to be celebrated for humiliating his father. The princess understood the contradiction. He had protected his future authority, yet success now tasted like betrayal. Palace advisors offered three choices: deny the confrontation, dismiss it as ordinary estate planning, or confirm that the original memorandum had been withdrawn. Charles rejected a proposed statement blaming miscommunication between households. He would not preserve himself by quietly blaming William. The king ordered officials to announce a new, jointly reviewed estate process. The revised statement would confirm legal scrutiny without criticizing the prince. Outside Windsor Castle, a newspaper vendor raised a front page showing Charles beneath the headline, "A King's Command, an Heir's Refusal." Nearby, the waiting crowd fell briefly silent as William's convoy passed without stopping. The estates were no longer the final test. Charles and William now had to prove that the crown had survived the collision between authority and accountability. Their answer would come not through another document, but through one final decision revealing what each man had learned from the rupture. The original meeting never took place. The lawyers were never dismissed, and William never gave the private promise Charles had demanded. Instead, the king withdrew the disputed memorandum and accepted a new process built around written protections, independent review, and limits respected by both reigns. It was not the ending Charles initially wanted. It was something more difficult, an admission that authority alone could not preserve the monarchy. Trust had to be rebuilt, not commanded, and father and son would have to rebuild it together. Charles ordered the Red Estate Memorandum cancelled. The document, a written proposal outlining future property rights and obligations, could no longer be used to secure private promises without full review. Every provision would have to be examined by representatives for the sovereign and the heir, ensuring that neither reign could bind the other through silence. Camilla received lifetime use of one residence and reasonable personal security. The queen consort would not be abandoned, but the agreement gave no permanent control to extended relatives and placed no lasting restrictions on William after accession, the moment when an heir formally becomes monarch. She accepted less than the original proposal had promised, yet she gained something stronger: protection that could survive scrutiny. Charles finally faced the truth behind his anger. The king had erupted because he feared mortality, helplessness, and the day when those depending on him might lose their protection. He had tried to control the future before it could take control away from him. In doing so, he had nearly damaged the son responsible for carrying that future forward. William kept his boundary, but he abandoned the language of battle. The prince explained that legal scrutiny had never been a rejection of his father. It was a refusal to allow unresolved family pressure to become an inherited royal burden. He had not fought against the crown. He had forced it to become clearer. Charles placed his pen beside the revised agreement rather than signing immediately. He looked toward William and said, "Read it first." The future king reviewed the final page, added his signature, and returned the pen. Only then did his father sign. Anne accepted the compromise. Catherine felt the strain between father and son finally begin to ease. Camilla received security without the sweeping guarantees that had caused the rupture. No one gained everything, but no one was left exposed. The crisis established a lasting principle. Private royal arrangements affecting future reigns had to be transparent, reviewable, and mutually acknowledged. Charles did not lose authority when William resisted him. He learned that authority and trust were not the same. William did not weaken the monarchy by demanding lawyers. He protected it from promises affection alone could not safely govern. The estate dispute ended not with one man defeating the other, but with a father accepting limits, a son offering respect, and the crown becoming stronger precisely because both chose accountability over resentment. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.